Well, the group trying to recall Mayor Latoya Cantrell and the Secretary of State have come to an agreement. Yesterday, we learned the two sides settled on cutting the number of active registered voters in Orleans Parish by 25,000. The status of those voters will be changed to inactive. They will not be changed. It lowers the number of voters the recall group needs to force a recall. Political analyst Clancy DuBos is weighing in on this, and you shook your head. Okay, so they're inactive, but they're...
No. They are active.
Okay.
They are not changing the roles at all.
Okay.
So
there's 25,000. What are they then?
It's just a number.
Okay.
Okay, here's what happens. And it's a long process, but basically the federal law says to protect voters, they created this status called inactive voters who can still vote.
Okay.
It's just voters who used to be purged. You used to just go from voting to not voting, but they created an intermediate step called inactive. You have all the rights of a regular voter, but it's because you've moved, and they get declared inactive because the voters themselves filed the change of address. They just agreed upon a number.
Okay.
And how did they come up with 25,000?
Yes, how did we get there?
Ardwan said, in a normal course of an annual canvass, which is required by law, state and federal law, an annual canvass, in the normal course of a canvass, the number of active voters gets reduced by about an average of 25,000. That's less than what the recall organizers wanted to have reclassified, but it's what Ardwan said, this is what I can justify.
Okay.
So that's what they agreed to. Nobody's classification is being changed. Nobody's being purged. This is not a voter rights issue.
Okay.
This is a recall issue. This settlement, this agreement applies only to this recall. It doesn't apply to the voter rolls at all. It's just a number that the state law requires Ardwan. It's his job in state law and only his job. When the recall petition gets presented at his office to begin this process, which they did last August 26th, the law says he must come up with a number of active voters and tell that to the registrar so she can then know how many signatures must be required to validate. She has to validate that many number of signatures in order for the recall petitions 180 days later to trigger a vote of the people on whether to recall the mayor. It gives the target number. 20% of the active voters is what the recall organizers need to get in terms of signatures on the petition. He said, we're not changing anybody's status under this agreement. We're simply revising the number down because if they had done another canvass, it would have reduced it by this much. And in the meantime, all the evidence that the recall organizers gathered to come up with their number of 32,000 plus, that's been presented to Ardwan's office, and he's doing a review, not an audit, but a review of the last canvass and the rolls in Orleans, because he's seeing things like people who are 116 years old
still
being
on there,
listed.
obviously,
People haven't voted since the 1990s. There's no reason for them to be there. So he's going to do a review himself, his staff, and he has election folks in there. The commissioner of elections who works for him has been in that job for 20 plus years. She knows what she's doing, and they're very even-handed. This is not a Democrat-Republican thing. They're following the law.
Okay, so we have city officials calling for transparency, and then you have the mayor saying voter suppression. You're saying they have been transparent, and that's not the issue.
The mayor went off half-cocked, as did a lot of people, before the terms of the settlement got announced. This is not voter suppression. This is voter enabling. Okay, that's really what it is. The whole inactive status, that's a safety valve. That's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. It was put there to protect black voters from being purged immediately. If you get put on the inactive list, they have to send you a card that lets you know you're on this list, and it gives you several chances to get off that list and back on the active list so that you have no problem. But even if you're on the inactive list, you can still vote. And if you go vote, you get put back on the active list automatically.
Okay, we're out of time, but so now the recall needs 44,976 signatures. So you got to think they have at least that many signatures on the petition already?
You know what they're not saying, which there are no angels in this. They're not saying how many they got.
It would seem like they'd be wasting our time now if they don't at least have that many. Now they have to be validated, but surely they have more than 45.
I don't know that because they're not saying, and that raises suspicions. Why are they playing? Why are they not being transparent? There's a transparency issue all around, but the law is the law, and it's a federal law. They can't mess around with that because they could risk going to jail. So all the officials from Ardwan to Wilson, everybody else, They have to follow the law, and that's what they're doing.
All right, Clancy DuBos, thank you so much. So complicated, we
Yes.
appreciate your expertise.